Want in on a little secret? What if I told you that getting your child to eat healthy food isn't the whole enchilada? In fact, raising a healthy eater, one that's well-nourished inside and out, requires a three-pronged approach. And that's what I'm talking about today. Hey everyone, my name's Jill Castle, and this channel is called The Nourished Child, and we talk all about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and navigating all the ins and outs and challenges that come along with raising kids. Hit the subscribe button if feeding kids and doing a good job at it is something you definitely want to keep learning about. Today we're talking about one of my most favorite topics, and that is how to nourish children in a more modern, integrated way. So today I'm going to cover three aspects: food, feeding, and child development, and actually how they all come together and how they integrate so that you can better nourish your children and be a great parent while you're doing it. So I've been a pediatric dietitian for a long time, and I have 4 of my own kids, and I've learned a lot of things along the way, not only from my own kids, but also from working with tons of families and children. And one of the things I learned early on from my own personal experience is that food and getting kids to eat healthy food isn't the only thing we need to be working on. I know it's hard enough trying to make sure our kids eat healthy food every day, but we also need to be focused on things like feeding them, that interaction between us and our kids, and where they are on the child development spectrum. So that's what we're going to dig in today. I'm going to give you a very high level, overarching view of what I think is the most modern way to nourish children. So let's dig in. You know, this all started when I was a very young mother. I had my first child around my 30s, and at the time I'd been a dietitian working in hospitals for about 7 years, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about feeding babies and young children. But boy, was I not prepared for the fact that it's a very different reality when you bring that baby home and you start on the journey of feeding them. Kids are their own little people, they have their own little minds, and they're not always easy to feed. And I encountered that situation with my own first child, who was not very interested in eating, so we struggled. It took me a while to figure out the best approach for nourishing her, and what I learned was feeding her healthy food was just part of the puzzle. It was not the whole enchilada. So while I knew a lot about food, nutrition for young children, I didn't know a lot about feeding them, and I certainly wasn't thinking about where my daughter was in her developmental spectrum. So the first thing I want to talk about is food. And yes, it's obvious kids need good, healthy food. If we're going to nourish children well, we need to make sure they're getting balanced meals with all the variety of foods from all the different food groups and a supply of nutrients that meets their daily requirements. There are lots of things to talk about here. I could unpack the whole thing, but when I think about food for kids, I think about regular meals, snacks throughout the day that are nutritious and filling and satisfying, meals that represent a lot of different food groups, from protein foods, whole grains, vegetables, fruits, dairy products, healthy fats. I want to see a smattering of all of those things in a meal. And I want kids to be able to enjoy sweets and treats at the same time. So part of this is, what are the healthy foods, which I think for the most part, many of us already know what those are, but what are the healthy foods that kids need? But how do we balance those with the foods kids want to eat? Those sweets and sugary drinks and savory, salty, fried foods. That's where a challenge can arise. So we're wanting to strike a food balance that is mostly nourishing, mostly nutritious, so that our children can get all the vitamins and minerals and protein, fat, and carbohydrates that they need to grow and develop well. Not only their physical size, but what's going on up there too. It all relates, and it is all important. I like to say that I believe all foods can fit, but that doesn't mean that we serve all foods all the time. It means that as parents, we have an idea of the balance we want to strike. We have a good idea of what nutritious foods are, and we know how to balance the indulgent things that our kids love to eat with those healthy, nourishing foods that our kids need to eat. The second area is feeding. So that interaction between you and your child is called feeding. So it's your attitude that you bring to the table. It's the actions that you take to get your child to eat or to get your child not to eat. Neither really works, as a side note. But feeding is rich with experiences, and it is really that daily interaction that helps your child develop their food relationship, how they feel about food, whether they eat well and choose nutritious foods, how they interact with food as they grow up. Are they embattled in dieting and restricting and trying to take foods out of their diet? Or do they approach food with a very open, adventurous, eager mind, enjoying the variety and flavors and cuisines that we have out there? So how you feed your child, that interaction can definitely influence that food relationship that your child is developing. So the gold standard of feeding is to be diplomatic with feeding. I like to call diplomatic feeding the love with limits approach, meaning you're loving, sensitive, kind. You've set up a nurturing environment for your child to eat in. You understand your child's food preferences. You understand your child's dislikes. And you take that into consideration as you're planning out your meals. But you also don't only consider that. You think of the things that your child needs, and you think of the foods that you want your child to eat. So all of those ideas and that awareness around food preferences and food dislikes, or new foods that your child hasn't tried, all of those things inform your decisions. Now, in terms of feeding, diplomatic feeding means that you have structure to your day, meaning that your meals and your snacks occur at regular times. You have a regular place for your children to eat. So that might be the kitchen, that might be the dining room, it might be on a picnic blanket in the middle of the family room if you don't have a table. But you have a regular, predictable location that your children can count on. And the third thing is that you allow your child to have some reasonable choices. That means if you're serving the fruit group for dinner or for lunch, you might say, would you like an apple or would you like an orange? But you don't say, hey, what fruit would you like today? Opens up Pandora's box. So instead of saying that, you want to give your child 2 or 3 reasonable options to choose from. So that's the feeding component. The third component is child development, and almost nobody talks about this as it relates to feeding and raising children who eat nutritious foods and enjoy it. So every child is going through development. There are ups and downs and predictable things that kids go through. For example, in toddlerhood, many toddlers go through the picky eating phase. That's kind of normal. They're trying to become more autonomous. They're trying to separate from their parents. They're exploring the world around them. And a lot of those milestones or things they are driven to do has to do with what they eat. So you've probably run into this before, or you might be in the thick of it now, but a child who refuses to eat foods that they used to like, that's a typical example of toddler picky eating. And I, as a dietitian, as a pediatric nutritionist, I consider that perfectly normal for the age. So it's important to understand all these different developmental milestones because they help you understand why your child's behaving the way they are, but it also helps you interact with your child in a really positive way. So for example, that picky eater toddler again, if they are refusing to try new foods, the last thing you want to do is push those foods on them because most toddlers are going to be like, no way, mom, I'm not having it. You want to roll with it, right? You want to kind of say, this is pretty typical toddler behavior. I'm gonna roll with this. Maybe she'll try it in another day. Maybe she won't try it for another couple of months, but there's lots of other foods to offer this child, and I'm not going to get caught up into a battle with my picky toddler. So again, your mindset changes when you know what to expect, and development, those developmental milestones, the changes that are very typical in infancy, toddlerhood, childhood, and adolescence can help inform you how to respond to your child with all of these different nutrition challenges that will come up. So food, feeding, child development. Those are the 3 areas that modern parents who are nourishing children, who want to nourish their children well, will think about. They won't just think about getting a healthy meal on the table. They'll think about also, how can I interact in positive ways and nurture my child and give them some independence and autonomy? And they will also be thinking of, I don't like that behavior, but it's kind of normal for age, or this is not normal at all and we have a problem. So understanding the developmental milestones can really inform your interpretation of what's going on, and that's going to inform how you behave and how you interact with your child. So if you want to raise a child who's a healthy eater, who's likes nutritious food, who's well nourished himself, who has a good food relationship, you will integrate food, feeding, and child development. That is the modern way to nourish kids. If you're struggling with a child who's not eating well, or struggling to parent around food in a meaningful, productive way, I encourage you to head to my website, The Nourished Child. I have all kinds of resources for you there that will help you along your parent journey in nutrition. Also, I'll remind you to subscribe here to this channel. I release a video every week, and you'll learn and continue to learn about nourishing your children in positive, fruitful, engaging ways. You can also grab my free download. I'll link it in the description below. It's called How to Nourish a Child, and it takes you through these 3 different categories: food, feeding, and child development. It gives you a checklist so you can see what you're doing really well at, and it can also show you where you need more development. I'll link that up in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, leave a comment below, let me know, or even just ask me a question. I'll be happy to answer. Last, if you did enjoy this show and you want to continue learning about childhood nutrition, please subscribe to the channel below. Take care, everyone. I'll see you next week.